Why the Germans feared Patton more than any Allied commander. In the spring of 1944, as intelligence officers at Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin compiled their morning briefing reports, one name appeared more frequently than any other in their files. Not Eisenhower, who commanded the entire Allied European theater. Not Montgomery, who had driven Rommel out of North Africa. The name that dominated German intelligence assessments, the name that consumed more analysis hours and generated more urgent reports than perhaps any other Allied commander, was George Smith Patton, Jr. Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, the senior German commander in Western Europe, and a man who had fought against the best generals 3 nations could field, monitored Patton's location with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every scrap of information about Patton's whereabouts, his assignment, his apparent mission, was marked as priority intelligence and rushed to the highest levels of command. The Germans feared Patton more than any other Allied commander for 3 specific reasons, each documented in their own intelligence assessments and post-war interrogations. He had studied German military doctrine so thoroughly that he fought using their own tactical principles against them. He operated at a tempo that consistently disrupted German defensive planning faster than they could respond, and he remained fundamentally unpredictable throughout the war, violating the patterns that German intelligence relied upon to anticipate enemy movements. From his first appearance commanding the Western Task Force in Morocco in November 1942 to his final operations in Germany in May 1945, Patton earned a reputation among German commanders that no other Allied general would match. This is the story of how that fear developed, battle by battle, and why even Germany's most experienced field marshals came to view one American general as their most dangerous opponent. Morocco. The first warning signs. In the autumn of 1942, German military intelligence received reports about an American general who had just led the Western Task Force in Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. The reports came from multiple sources: Vichy French officers who had observed the American landing in Morocco, German military advisors stationed with French forces, and the systematic analysis of captured documents and prisoner interrogations conducted by the Abwehr. What those reports contained would mark the beginning of German concerns about this particular commander. On November 8, 1942, George Patton put 35,000 American troops ashore on the coast of Morocco at 3 separate landing sites: Mehdia, Fedala, and Safi. The operation faced resistance from Vichy French forces who, bound by their allegiance to the Vichy government, fought back before their commanders negotiated a surrender. By November 11th, 3 days after the initial landings, Patton's forces had secured Casablanca and accepted the French capitulation. Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces across the Mediterranean theater from his headquarters in Rome, requested a comprehensive intelligence analysis of this American general. The request followed standard German military intelligence procedure. Whenever a new enemy commander appeared, particularly one demonstrating noteworthy tactical performance, detailed background investigation was warranted. The intelligence staff compiled their assessment, drawing on multiple sources. The resulting report would have made interesting reading for German commanders. George Patton, the analysts discovered, had devoted considerable effort throughout his career to studying German military tactics and theory. He read and spoke German fluently. His personal library included works by Clausewitz, von Moltke, and Schleifen in their original language, not in translation. During the 1920s, he had spent time walking the battlefields of World War I in France, studying the terrain where German armies had nearly broken through Allied lines in 1918. The intelligence assessment concluded that Patton possessed an unusually thorough understanding of German operational thinking. German analysts compared Patton's performance in Morocco against standard American military doctrine as they understood it. The United States Army Field Manual FM 100-5, published in 1941 and available to German intelligence through various means, emphasized methodical advances backed by overwhelming firepower superiority. American commanders, based on German observations of training exercises and early operations, typically moved with deliberate caution, consolidating gains and ensuring supply lines were secure before advancing further. This doctrinal approach was predictable and, from the German perspective, manageable. Patton's actual conduct in Morocco diverged significantly from this pattern. His forces had advanced with aggressive forward momentum that appeared inconsistent with standard American practice. The timeline spoke for itself. 3 days from landing to securing a major port city against opposition. German intelligence officers, trained to identify patterns and assess capabilities, noted this discrepancy in their reports. At some point during that winter of 1942-43, these reports would have reached desks in Berlin, where officers reviewed intelligence assessments from all theaters. The exact conversations that took place in those offices are not recorded, but the subsequent allocation of intelligence resources tells its own story. German intelligence began tracking Patton more closely. His name entered the watch lists. The foundation was being laid for what would become, over the following 2.5 years, an intensive effort to monitor and predict the movements of one American general. The German military culture placed high value on studying enemy commanders. They had refined this practice over decades, understanding that individual leadership often made decisive differences in battle outcomes. In Patton, they were beginning to recognize something that would concern them greatly: an American commander who did not fight according to the patterns they had come to expect from American forces. Tunisia, from defeat to capability. On February 14, 1943, German forces under Generaloberst Hans-Jürgen von Arnim launched an offensive through the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. The attack represented the first major ground combat between German and American forces in the European theater. For the inexperienced American units positioned in the pass, the encounter proved catastrophic. German tanks and infantry broke through defensive positions. American soldiers, many seeing their first combat, retreated in disorder. Equipment was abandoned on the battlefield. Unit cohesion collapsed. By February 25, when the offensive concluded, the United States had suffered approximately 6,000 casualties in killed, wounded, and captured personnel. German commanders observed the aftermath with professional interest. The performance of American forces at Kasserine confirmed certain preconceptions about American military capabilities. Individual soldiers appeared adequately trained and equipped, but leadership at the tactical and operational levels had proven inadequate. Unit coordination was poor. The response to German tactical maneuvers lacked coherence. These were the observations that German intelligence officers documented in their reports, flowing back through command channels to Berlin and to General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel's headquarters. The question German commanders now considered was how the Americans would respond to this defeat. Would they adopt a defensive posture? Would there be wholesale changes in command structure? How long would it take for American forces to recover their effectiveness? On March 6, 1943, George Patton assumed command of the Second Corps, the American formation that had been shattered at Kasserine. He took over a demoralized force at its headquarters near Jebel Kouef in Tunisia. Within a remarkably brief period, German intelligence began reporting changes in American tactical behavior. The transformation occurred with surprising rapidity. By late March, approximately 2 to 3 weeks after Patton's assumption of command, German reconnaissance units were encountering different responses from American forces. Patrol activity had intensified. American units were conducting more aggressive probing operations. Tactical coordination appeared significantly improved. The defensive posture that characterized American operations immediately after Kasserine was being replaced by something more active. German intelligence officers tasked with monitoring American forces would have been comparing current observations against their baseline assessments from earlier in the campaign. The reports they compiled during this period noted these behavioral changes. More significantly, the analysts recognized that these were the same units, the same soldiers who had performed so poorly at Kasserine. Personnel replacements and equipment resupply could not account for such rapid improvement in tactical effectiveness. The analytical conclusion that emerged from German intelligence assessments pointed to a change in leadership as the primary explanation. This interpretation aligned well with German military culture and doctrine, which placed enormous emphasis on the quality of command. German officers understood from their own experience and training that capable leadership could transform the performance of military units far more rapidly than any amount of additional equipment or manpower. General Feldmarschall Rommel's personal diary entries from March 1943, later examined by historians, contain observations about improved American performance. While Rommel did not attribute this change to Patton specifically in his diary entries available to us, he did note that American forces had become noticeably more capable in a short time frame. German intelligence reports from the period, now part of the historical record, similarly documented increased effectiveness of the Second Corps during this time frame. For German intelligence officers studying the situation in Tunisia during late March and early April 1943, a pattern was becoming evident. An American commander had taken over a defeated force and had restored its combat effectiveness within weeks. This represented exactly the kind of capable enemy leadership that German doctrine taught commanders to identify and track carefully. Sicily. Operational audacity. July 10, 1943, marked the beginning of Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. The operational plan assigned British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army the primary role, advancing up the eastern coast of Sicily toward the strategically vital port city of Messina. General George Patton's 7th Army received the supporting mission of protecting Montgomery's left flank and securing the western portion of the island. Within the context of Allied command relationships and planning, this represented a secondary role. Patton's execution of his assigned mission diverged significantly from what the operational plan anticipated. Rather than maintaining a static defensive posture on Montgomery's flank, he drove his forces westward across Sicily with considerable momentum. By July 22, 12 days after the initial landings, American forces under Patton's command had captured Palermo on the northwestern coast of the island. He then redirected his axis of advance eastward, moving along Sicily's northern coastline toward Messina. On August 17, 1943, soldiers from the American 7th Army entered Messina. Patton's forces had covered approximately 200 miles across difficult Sicilian terrain in 39 days of active combat operations, arriving at the strategic objective ahead of Montgomery's 8th Army, which had been assigned the direct approach to that city. For German defensive forces on Sicily, primarily the 15th Panzergrenadier Division and the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, Patton's westward drive, followed by his rapid advance along the northern coast, created operational complications. The German plan for Sicily, once the Allied invasion made the island untenable, called for a fighting withdrawal to the Strait of Messina and an evacuation to mainland Italy. Operation Lehrgang, the German evacuation operation, was designed as a methodical, phased withdrawal that would preserve German combat power for the defense of Italy. The American advance from the west compressed the German evacuation timeline. Units that had anticipated conducting gradual withdrawals over several days found their time available significantly reduced. Some German forces discovered their planned routes to evacuation points were threatened or cut off by the American advance, forcing them to take alternate routes or abandon heavier equipment that could not be moved quickly enough. The German evacuation of Sicily ultimately succeeded in withdrawing approximately 40,000 German troops, along with substantial quantities of equipment across the Strait of Messina to the Italian mainland. However, the operation proved more costly and chaotic than German planners had intended. Equipment that might have been saved under a more methodical withdrawal had to be destroyed or abandoned. The organizational strain of conducting the evacuation under pressure from multiple directions reduced the effectiveness of what should have been a carefully controlled operation. German after-action assessments of the Sicily campaign, compiled by Wehrmacht staff officers for distribution through military channels, provide insight into how German commanders were beginning to view Patton's operational methods. These reports, now available in historical archives, noted that Patton's operational tempo exceeded what German intelligence had come to expect from American commanders based on doctrinal analysis and previous observations. The phrase that appeared in various forms in these German assessments compared Patton's conduct of operations to the methods employed by German panzer commanders. This comparison carried particular weight within German military culture. The principles of armored warfare, rapid exploitation of opportunities, maintenance of offensive momentum, acceptance of calculated operational risks, represented core elements of German tactical doctrine. When German officers drew comparisons between an enemy commander's methods and their own panzer warfare principles, they were acknowledging that the enemy understood and could execute the type of mobile operations that German forces had employed to great effect in earlier campaigns. The operational intelligence lessons that emerged from Sicily reinforced the pattern German intelligence had begun to observe in Tunisia. Montgomery's Eighth Army, while professionally competent and ultimately successful, operated in ways that German intelligence found relatively predictable. The methodical, carefully planned advances allowed German commanders time to assess British intentions and arrange defensive responses. Bradley's operations similarly followed patterns that German intelligence analysts could track and, to some degree, anticipate. Patton presented a different analytical challenge: his willingness to exceed his assigned role, his rapid exploitation of success in the drive to Palermo, and his sustained offensive momentum along the northern coast demonstrated an operational approach that was both more aggressive than American doctrine typically prescribed and more difficult for German intelligence to predict with confidence. The political crisis. In early August 1943, at the height of the Sicily campaign's success, George Patton visited 2 evacuation hospitals where wounded soldiers were being treated. The events that occurred during those visits would create a political crisis that nearly ended his military career. On August 3, 1943, at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, Patton encountered Private Charles H. Cool. The soldier had been diagnosed by medical personnel with what was termed psychoneurosis anxiety state, a condition recognized by military medicine as a legitimate psychiatric response to combat stress. Patton, whose views on such conditions differed sharply from medical consensus, struck the soldier across the face, called him a coward, and drew his service pistol while threatening to shoot him. 1 week later, on August 10th at the 15th Evacuation Hospital, Patton encountered Private Paul G. Bennett in similar circumstances. The soldier was suffering from severe combat stress. Patton struck Bennett twice, again drew his pistol, and threatened to execute him on the spot in front of medical staff and other wounded soldiers. Initially, news of these incidents remained confined to those who had witnessed them and the reporters who learned about them through their contacts with medical personnel and soldiers. Journalists including Demarie Bess, Merrill Mueller, and Al Newman became aware of what had occurred, but agreed, after consultation among themselves and with military authorities, to suppress the story temporarily. This agreement held until November 1943, when radio commentator Drew Pearson broadcast the story to the American public. The public response was immediate and severe. Members of Congress demanded Patton's removal from command. Newspaper editorial boards across the United States published columns questioning his fitness to lead American soldiers. The general, who had just completed a highly successful campaign in Sicily, faced the realistic possibility of being relieved of command and sent back to the United States in professional disgrace. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, as Patton's superior officer and commander of Allied forces in the Mediterranean, faced a difficult decision. He issued a formal reprimand to Patton, one of the most severe official rebukes that could be delivered to a general officer. Eisenhower required Patton to make personal apologies to Private Cool and Private Bennett, to the medical personnel who had witnessed the incidents, and to every unit serving under his command in 7th Army. However, Eisenhower did not relieve Patton of command, nor did he send him back to the United States. For German intelligence services, which routinely monitored Allied press and radio broadcasts as part of their intelligence collection activities, the Patton scandal provided extensive information. The Abwehr compiled reports on the controversy, tracking the political response in the United States, the calls for Patton's dismissal, and the ultimate outcome. These reports were distributed through German intelligence channels for analysis. The intelligence assessment that German analysts would have conducted regarding this situation involves some inference, as the specific internal German intelligence discussions are not fully documented in available historical records. However, we can reasonably deduce from standard intelligence practices what their likely analysis would have included. The removal of an effective enemy commander due to non-military considerations would typically represent an advantage for opposing forces. The removal of Patton, whom German intelligence had identified as an unusually capable and aggressive commander, would have eliminated a specific operational threat. The actual outcome, Eisenhower's decision to retain Patton in the army despite the severe reprimand, would have provided German intelligence with significant information about American command priorities. The fact that Eisenhower kept Patton available for future assignment suggested that American military leadership valued Patton's operational capabilities enough to overlook serious misconduct. This, in turn, indicated that the Americans were likely preserving Patton for important future operations. Following the slapping incidents, Patton was removed from command of the 7th Army and sent to England. For German intelligence, this created an important question. What assignment would Patton receive next? Where was he, and what was he preparing to do? Operation Fortitude, the perfect deception. By early 1944, the strategic situation in Europe had reached a critical juncture. An Allied invasion of Western Europe was inevitable. For the German High Command responsible for defending thousands of miles of coastline from Norway to southern France, two questions dominated all strategic planning. Where would the invasion occur, and when would it begin? From a purely geographic and logistical perspective, the Pas-de-Calais region of northern France presented the most obvious invasion point. The English Channel there measured only 21 miles at its narrowest point, representing the shortest sea crossing for an amphibious operation. An Allied landing at Pas-de-Calais would place invasion forces on the most direct route to Germany's industrial heartland in the Ruhr Valley. German strategic planners, analyzing Allied options from a rational military perspective, concluded that Pas-de-Calais represented the most logical choice for the main invasion effort. In the first months of 1944, German intelligence began detecting indications of a massive Allied force assembling in southeastern England, in the counties directly across the Channel from Pas-de-Calais. Radio intercepts suggested the presence of an entire army group, designated as the 1st United States Army Group. Intelligence reports indicated this force included numerous divisions, extensive armor, substantial numbers of landing craft, and all the logistical infrastructure necessary to support a major amphibious operation. The commanding officer of this force, according to multiple intelligence indicators, was George S. Patton. For German intelligence analysts who had been tracking Patton since Morocco, this information fit a logical pattern. The Americans had removed Patton from frontline command in Sicily following the slapping incidents, but Eisenhower had kept him in the army. Now Patton had reappeared in England in command of what appeared to be the largest American formation in the European theater. The analytical conclusion seemed straightforward. The Americans would employ their most aggressive and capable general to command the main invasion effort. Therefore, wherever Patton was preparing to attack represented the location of the primary Allied landing. What German intelligence did not know was that the First United States Army Group existed primarily as an elaborate fiction. The force was the centerpiece of Operation Fortitude South, one of the most successful deception operations in military history. The tanks that German reconnaissance aircraft photographed were inflatable rubber. The landing craft were plywood constructions. The radio traffic that German signals intelligence intercepted was carefully scripted. The headquarters buildings were painted facades. The entire apparatus was designed to convince German intelligence that a massive invasion force was preparing to strike at Pas-de-Calais. The selection of Patton as the nominal commander of this phantom army was deliberate. Allied deception planners understood that German intelligence placed enormous emphasis on tracking Patton's location and assignment. They correctly calculated that the Germans would assume the Americans would use their most dangerous general for the most important operation. By placing Patton in apparent command of FUSAG, the deception planners exploited German respect for Patton's capabilities to support the fiction. The German response to this intelligence demonstrated the effectiveness of the deception. The German 15th Army, consisting of 19 divisions, was positioned to defend the Pas-de-Calais region. The German 7th Army, covering the Normandy coastline, comprised only 14 divisions. More critically, the Panzer Reserves, the mobile armoured divisions that could mount decisive counterattacks against any Allied landing, were positioned to respond to an invasion at Calais, rather than being held in Central Reserve, where they could react to landings anywhere along the coast. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces launched Operation Overlord, landing at 5 beaches along the Normandy coast approximately 150 miles southwest of Pas-de-Calais. The invasion came as a tactical surprise to German forces in Normandy, who were not at maximum alert status. However, the German command's response to the Normandy landings was complicated by the continued belief that these landings might represent a diversion. The real invasion, the main effort commanded by Patton, could still be coming at Pas-de-Calais. For 6 weeks following D-Day, substantial German forces remained positioned at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. The German 15th Army, which could have been committed to the Normandy battle in the critical first week when Allied beachheads were most vulnerable, remained largely in place. Panzer divisions that could have mounted immediate counterattacks against the Normandy landings were held back, awaiting the anticipated Patton-led assault at Calais. The historical record now shows that this delay in committing German reserves to the Normandy battle was crucial to Allied success. The additional week or two that Allied forces had to consolidate their beachheads, build up supplies, and establish air superiority allowed them to withstand the German counterattacks that did eventually come. When panzer divisions finally arrived in Normandy in late June and early July, they encountered Allied forces that were far stronger and better established than would have been the case had those same divisions been committed immediately after D-Day. Operation Fortitude succeeded because it exploited accurate German intelligence assessments. German intelligence had correctly evaluated Patton as an exceptionally capable and dangerous commander. They had correctly concluded that the Americans would employ such a commander in their most important operation. These accurate assessments, when fed carefully controlled misinformation about Patton's assignment and location, led German command to deploy their forces based on false premises. The irony was profound. German fear of Patton, built on legitimate tactical experience from Morocco, Tunisia, and Sicily, had been weaponized against them. Their professional respect for his abilities had made them predictable, and that predictability had been exploited to achieve strategic surprise on D-Day. Normandy breakout. The real Patton returns. On August 1, 1944, George Patton officially assumed command of the United States Third Army and entered combat operations in Normandy. The Ghost Army commander became real again, and German forces were about to experience firsthand what they had been anticipating for months. The context for Third Army's activation was Operation Cobra, the First Army offensive that had begun on July 25th. General Omar Bradley's forces had achieved a breakthrough west of St. Lo, creating a gap in German defensive lines. On August 1st, Third Army became operational with the mission of exploiting that breakthrough. What followed demonstrated exactly why German intelligence had devoted such resources to tracking Patton. In the first week of August, Third Army's 8th Corps under Major General Troy Middleton drove westward into the Brittany Peninsula. The objective was to capture the Brittany ports, Brest, Lorient, and Saint-Nazaire, which Allied planners needed for logistical support. Rennes, a major road junction in eastern Brittany, fell to American forces on August 4th. However, even as one corps drove west, Patton was redirecting the main weight of his army eastward. Third Army's 15th Corps, commanded by Major General Wade Hayslip, drove toward Le Mans, while 12th Corps and 20th Corps pushed east and southeast. Le Mans, a critical road and rail junction, fell to American forces on August 8th. In 1 week of operations, Third Army had advanced over 200 miles from its starting positions, conducting combat operations across a front of extraordinary width. For German 7th Army, attempting to maintain cohesive defensive positions, Third Army's operations created cascading crises. German units that had established defensive lines found American forces bypassing their positions and appearing in their rear areas. Supply routes were cut, command posts were threatened, communications between higher headquarters and frontline units were disrupted. The German command structure in western France was not being systematically destroyed by frontal assault. It was disintegrating because the front line was moving faster than German units could relocate, or German intelligence could track. The German High Command's response to this crisis was Operation Lüttich, a counterattack launched on August 7th near the town of Mortagne. Hitler had ordered this offensive with the objective of cutting Third Army's supply lines at Avranches, the hinge point through which all of Third Army's supplies were flowing. The attack committed significant armoured forces, including the 2nd SS Panzer Division and the 1st SS Panzer Division. By August 13th, the counterattack had failed completely, stopped by American ground forces and devastated by Allied air attacks. The failure of the Mortagne counterattack created an opportunity for a decisive encirclement of German forces in Normandy. Canadian First Army was pushing south from Caen in the north. British Second Army was applying pressure from the west. American First Army was pushing east, and Third Army was swinging north. Most of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were now in a potential pocket with limited routes of escape to the east. Falaise, destruction of an army. By mid-August 1944, German forces in Normandy faced encirclement. The geographical situation placed most of the German 7th Army and elements of 5th Panzer Army in an area between Argentan in the south and Falaise in the north, with Allied forces converging from multiple directions. The gap between American forces approaching from the south and Canadian forces fighting south from Falaise represented the primary escape route for German forces attempting to withdraw eastward. On August 13, 1944, the American 15th Corps under Major General Wade Hayslip reached the town of Argentan. Canadian forces were fighting their way south toward Falaise, approximately 15 miles north of Argentan. The gap between these two forces represented the opening through which tens of thousands of German soldiers were attempting to escape. A controversy emerged at this juncture that remains debated by military historians. The boundary between army groups placed Falaise in the Canadian sector of operations. Patton requested permission from General Bradley to advance north beyond Argentan to close the gap and complete the encirclement. Bradley denied this request, concerned about the possibility of friendly fire incidents if American and Canadian forces met in the confusion of mobile combat. Patton's diary entries from this period, available in historical archives, express his frustration at being halted when he believed complete encirclement was achievable. The gap between Allied forces finally closed on August 19th to 21st, though the exact dates vary depending on which sector of the pocket is being examined. By the time the encirclement was complete, some German forces had escaped through the gap. However, the casualties and equipment losses suffered by German forces in what became known as the Falaise Pocket were catastrophic. Documented German casualties in the Falaise Pocket include approximately 50,000 soldiers captured and an estimated 10,000 killed. These numbers represent a significant portion of the combat strength of two German armies. Even more devastating from an operational perspective were the equipment losses. The vast majority of tanks, artillery pieces, and vehicles belonging to the encircled formations were destroyed or captured. While some German soldiers escaped the pocket on foot or in small vehicles, they emerged without the heavy equipment necessary to conduct sustained defensive operations. Contemporary accounts from the Falaise Pocket, including reports from Allied soldiers who entered the area after the fighting ended, describe scenes of extensive destruction. Roads were choked with destroyed vehicles. Fields were littered with abandoned equipment. The evidence of disorganized retreat and collapse of unit cohesion was extensive. Post-war assessments by German officers who survived the Falaise encirclement frequently compare the experience to Stalingrad, the catastrophic encirclement of German Sixth Army on the Eastern Front in 1942 to 1943. However, many of these same officers note a critical difference. At Stalingrad, German forces had time to establish defensive positions and organize their perimeter before the Soviet encirclement was complete. At Falaise, the rapid pace of Allied advances, particularly Third Army's swing north from the south, provided minimal time for German forces to prepare organized defenses or coordinate withdrawal movements. Generaloberst Günther von Kluge had replaced Feldmarschall von Rundstedt as Oberbefehlshaber West, Commander-in-Chief West, following the Normandy invasion. In his reports to Hitler during mid-August, von Kluge described the situation facing German forces in increasingly desperate terms. The Allied forces, particularly Third Army, could not be stopped with available German resources. Von Kluge committed suicide on August 19, 1944, while traveling back to Germany after being relieved of command. His suicide note, recovered after the war, mentioned among other factors the impossibility of preventing Allied operational success with the forces available to him. The destruction of German field armies at Falaise effectively ended organized German resistance in France. In the weeks following the closure of the Falaise Pocket, Allied armies advanced rapidly toward the German border. German forces conducted fighting withdrawals but could not establish stable defensive lines. The loss of equipment at Falaise meant that even units that escaped encirclement lacked the tanks, artillery, and transport necessary to conduct effective defensive operations. The German verdict. Following Germany's surrender in May 1945, Allied intelligence services conducted systematic interrogations of captured German senior officers. These interviews were carried out by professional intelligence personnel and were designed to elicit candid military assessments rather than propaganda or post-war excuses. Among many subjects, Allied interrogators repeatedly asked German commanders how they evaluated their Allied opponents. One question appeared in various forms across these interrogations. Which Allied commanders did German officers most respect or fear? When examined across different services and time periods, the answers show striking consistency. Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, former Commander-in-Chief West, provided the most frequently cited assessment. Having commanded German forces against all major Allied leaders in Western Europe, Rundstedt identified George S. Patton as the Allied commander the Germans feared most. He described Patton as a brilliant offensive tactician and the supreme master of mobile warfare. These statements appear in multiple interrogation reports and have been confirmed by historians reviewing the original records. The weight of Rundstedt's judgment lay in his experience. He had faced Eisenhower's strategic direction, Montgomery's deliberate offensives, Bradley's steady execution, and Patton's exploitation operations. Based on direct operational experience, he concluded that Patton posed the greatest danger. Other German commanders echoed this view. General der Panzertruppe Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded Panzer Lehr Division in Normandy, stated during interrogation that Patton was the only Allied commander who demonstrated instincts comparable to German panzer leaders. This was not casual praise. Within German military culture, likening an enemy to a panzer commander meant acknowledging mastery of mobile warfare, as the Germans themselves defined it. German panzer doctrine emphasized speed, relentless exploitation, acceptance of operational risk, and the use of shock to disrupt enemy command and control. These principles had underpinned German successes earlier in the war. When German officers said Patton fought like a panzer commander, they were recognizing that he understood and applied the form of warfare they regarded as most dangerous. Assessments of other Allied commanders were notably different. Bernard Montgomery was respected as capable and effective, but German officers consistently described his operations as predictable. His methodical preparation and preference for overwhelming force allowed German intelligence to anticipate his intentions. Several interrogations included variations of the remark, "We always knew what Montgomery would do next." Omar Bradley was judged competent and professional, but cautious. German commanders believed his adherence to doctrine made his decisions and movements easier to forecast. Dwight D. Eisenhower was acknowledged as an effective supreme commander, particularly for coalition management, but German interrogations focused far less on his operational skill than on those of field commanders. In contrast, German assessments of Patton consistently highlighted three interconnected traits. First, he understood German doctrine and operational thinking and applied those principles effectively. Second, he operated at a tempo that repeatedly disrupted German planning and decision-making. Third, he remained unpredictable, violating the patterns German intelligence relied upon to forecast enemy behavior. Patton's study of German military thought was well documented and noted by German officers themselves. His operational tempo consistently exceeded German expectations from North Africa through France and into Germany, forcing German commanders to react to situations that had already changed. His unpredictability compounded these effects, as he attacked when consolidation seemed logical, advanced despite logistical uncertainty, and accepted risks others avoided, often with decisive results. Taken together, these assessments explain why German officers feared Patton more than any other Allied commander. Their judgment was not shaped by myth or post-war legend, but by repeated operational encounters with a commander who understood their doctrine, moved faster than their planning cycles, and refused to behave as expected. Ardennes, the final demonstration. On December 16, 1944, German forces launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, known to the Allies as the Battle of the Bulge. 3 German armies, comprising 30 divisions, attacked through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and achieved complete tactical surprise. It was Germany's last major offensive in the West, committing its remaining armoured reserves in a desperate attempt to split Allied armies and seize Antwerp. The initial success was dramatic. Thinly held American positions collapsed under the assault, and within days a large salient, the Bulge, had formed in Allied lines. The 101st Airborne Division, rushed to the road junction at Bastogne, was soon surrounded. The crisis was serious enough that General Eisenhower convened an emergency conference at Verdun on December 19th. At Verdun, Eisenhower asked how quickly Allied forces could counterattack to relieve pressure and halt the German advance. Most commanders spoke of the enormous preparations required. Redirecting an army meant reorganizing logistics, repositioning fuel and ammunition, disengaging units, and redeploying them along a new axis. The consensus was that such an effort would take weeks. Then George S. Patton stated that Third Army could attack in 48 hours. The reaction ranged from skepticism to disbelief. Bradley later wrote that he assumed Patton was exaggerating. Others recalled Eisenhower warning Patton that this was not the moment for bravado. Turning an army of more than 250,000 men and over 130,000 vehicles 90 degrees in winter conditions seemed impossible in 2 days. What most of those present did not know was that Patton had already prepared. Colonel Oscar Koch, Third Army's intelligence officer, had warned since early December that a German offensive through the Ardennes was possible. While higher Allied intelligence dismissed the idea, Patton trusted Koch's assessment and quietly ordered contingency plans for a rapid turn north. By the time of the Verdun Conference, Third Army staff had completed 3 detailed plans for counterattacking into the Ardennes. Routes, logistics, communications, and command arrangements had already been worked out. When Eisenhower accepted Patton's offer, the Army was ready to move. On December 20th, Third Army pivoted north. Third Corps, led by Major General John Milliken, spearheaded the attack. Units disengaged, marched over icy roads, and redeployed with remarkable speed. More than 250,000 soldiers and 130,000 vehicles changed direction simultaneously while maintaining coordination and security. By December 22nd, Third Army was in contact with German forces on the southern flank of the Bulge. On December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through to Bastogne, relieving the 101st Airborne. The siege was lifted, and the German offensive lost momentum. German planners had assumed that major Allied counterattacks would take weeks to organize. Winter weather, logistics, and Allied caution all supported that expectation. Instead, Patton struck within days. German forces were forced to divert units south, disrupting the drive toward Antwerp and shifting the initiative to the Allies. By early January 1945, the offensive had failed. Post-war interrogations of German commanders reveal a common conclusion. They had not expected such speed. One officer summarized the error simply, "We should have known better. This was Patton." From Morocco to the Ardennes, German forces repeatedly underestimated how fast Patton could move. And each time, that mistake proved costly. Why the fear was justified. The question of why German commanders feared George Patton more than any other Allied general can be answered through documented German intelligence assessments, post-war interrogations, and the operational record from 1942 to 1945. The first reason was doctrinal alignment. Patton understood German military theory at a deep level. He had studied the principles of Bewegungskrieg, the mobile warfare that underpinned German tactical doctrine. He read Clausewitz and grasped the importance of offensive initiative. He understood Auftragstaktik, the delegation of mission-type orders, and the value of rapid envelopment emphasized by thinkers such as von Moltke and Schlieffen. When Patton conducted operations, German commanders recognized that he was applying their own doctrine against them. This understanding appeared repeatedly in practice. In North Africa, Patton emphasized rapid exploitation before defenses could solidify. In Tunisia, aggressive pressure disrupted German preparations. In Sicily, he maintained momentum even when officially assigned a secondary role. In France, he exploited the Normandy breakout with deep, fast advances that closely resembled German panzer doctrine. At every level, Patton demonstrated an intuitive grasp of principles German officers had been taught for decades. German intelligence assessments reflected this recognition. When officers wrote that Patton fought like a panzer commander, they were not using metaphor. They meant that he understood and applied the same operational logic they considered most effective. The second reason was operational tempo. Long before theorists later described decision cycles such as the OODA loop, Patton instinctively operated inside the enemy's decision-making process. His forces acted faster than German commanders could observe, orient, and respond. This pattern appeared in every campaign. In North Africa and Tunisia, German responses lagged behind rapidly changing American actions. In Sicily, evacuation timelines were compressed by faster-than-expected advances. In France, defensive lines were overtaken before they could be fully established. Even during the Ardennes campaign, German planning was disrupted by American countermoves that came far earlier than anticipated. German commanders found themselves reacting to situations that no longer existed. This tempo was deliberate. It reflected Patton's willingness to accept risk, his understanding of logistics, and his relentless pressure on subordinates to maintain momentum. The third reason was unpredictability. German intelligence relied heavily on identifying patterns in enemy behavior. Many Allied commanders operated within recognizable doctrinal frameworks, allowing German planners to anticipate their actions. Patton did not. He attacked when consolidation seemed logical. He advanced despite logistical uncertainty. He altered his approach between campaigns and sometimes within them. As a result, German intelligence forecasts regarding Patton were frequently wrong. Commanders prepared for contingencies that never materialized while being surprised by actions they had not expected. These three factors, doctrinal understanding, operational tempo, and unpredictability, reinforced one another. Patton knew what German commanders expected and deliberately violated those expectations. His speed reduced their ability to adjust. His unpredictability made every delay more costly. Other Allied commanders possessed elements of these traits. Montgomery demonstrated careful planning and doctrinal awareness. Bradley showed professional competence and steady execution. But only Patton consistently combined all three. Feldmarschall von Rundstedt's judgment that Patton was the most dangerous Allied commander was not post-war exaggeration. It was a professional assessment formed through sustained combat experience. Across North Africa, Sicily, France, Belgium, and Germany, Patton repeatedly validated German fears through results. He was feared not because of reputation, but because his performance confirmed every concern German intelligence had raised. The lessons of combat. The historical record of German fear of George Patton offers insights that extend beyond the specific campaigns of World War II. The story illuminates fundamental aspects of military operations, command effectiveness, and the role of individual leadership in modern warfare. The immediate operational impact of German concerns about Patton shaped several critical moments of the war. Operation Fortitude succeeded in deceiving German intelligence about Allied invasion plans, specifically because German commanders believed Patton would command the main invasion effort. Their accurate assessment of his capabilities, when fed false information about his assignment and location, led them to position substantial forces at Pas-de-Calais, while the actual invasion struck Normandy. The 6 weeks that German reserves remained at Calais, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army, allowed Allied forces in Normandy to consolidate their beachhead under less pressure than would otherwise have been the case. The rapid Allied advance through France following the Normandy breakout owed much to Third Army's operational tempo. While multiple Allied armies participated in the liberation of France, Third Army's pace of advance and depth of penetration consistently disrupted German attempts to establish stable defensive lines. The destruction of German field armies at Falaise removed organized resistance that might have delayed Allied advances for weeks or months. The speed with which Patton responded to the German Ardennes offensive blunted Germany's last major attack and shortened the final phase of the European war. Beyond these immediate tactical and operational effects, the German experience fighting Patton influenced post-war military thinking. The United States Army's development of air-land battle doctrine in the 1980s incorporated principles that Patton had demonstrated in practice. The importance of operational tempo, the value of deep operations that disrupted enemy command and control, the effectiveness of combined arms operations conducted at high speed. While air-land battle doctrine drew on many sources, the lessons of Third Army's operations in 1944–45 provided practical validation of theoretical concepts. The story also illuminates the continued importance of individual leadership in modern warfare. The conventional wisdom in the 1930s and early 1940s suggested that industrialized warfare between major powers would be decided primarily by material factors: industrial capacity, technological superiority, numerical advantage. Individual commanders would still matter, this thinking suggested. but less than in previous eras when smaller armies led by individual generals could maneuver for decisive advantage. Patton's career demonstrated that even in mechanized industrial warfare with millions of soldiers and thousands of tanks, individual leadership could still produce decisive effects. The same American soldiers who had been defeated at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 became an effective fighting force within weeks under different leadership. The Third Army that advanced across France in August 1944 consisted of divisions that other commanders could have led, employing equipment that was available to any American formation. What made Third Army's performance distinctive was primarily the leadership that directed its operations. German commanders, shaped by a military culture that emphasized the decisive role of leadership, recognized this immediately. They understood from their own experience that commanders made crucial differences in operational effectiveness. Their professional assessment of Patton acknowledged that he represented exactly the kind of enemy leadership that was most dangerous, someone who understood warfare at both theoretical and practical levels, who could inspire maximum performance from his forces, and who could operate at a tempo that disrupted enemy planning. The fact that this assessment came from the enemy rather than from friendly sources gives it particular credibility. German commanders had every incentive to provide honest, accurate evaluations of Allied capabilities. Their professional survival and the survival of their soldiers depended on understanding enemy strengths and weaknesses clearly. When German generals stated in post-war interrogations that Patton was the Allied commander they most feared, they were providing professional military judgments based on direct experience. These judgments have been validated by subsequent historical research. As archives have been opened and documents have become available, historians have been able to compare German wartime assessments with the full operational record. The consistency between what German intelligence reported during the war and what the historical record now shows confirms that German assessments, while occasionally wrong in details, were generally accurate in their overall evaluation of Patton's capabilities and methods. The broader lesson concerns the nature of military effectiveness. Superior numbers and equipment matter, certainly, but they are not sufficient for decisive success. The quality of leadership, the speed of decision-making, the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances, and the ability to operate at tempo that disrupts enemy planning all contribute critically to operational effectiveness. Patton demonstrated all of these qualities consistently across multiple campaigns against a highly professional enemy. The fear he generated in German commanders was their recognition of this combination of capabilities. For students of military history and practitioners of military arts, the story of German fear of Patton provides case study material that remains relevant. The principles Patton employed, maintaining operational tempo, exploiting enemy weaknesses before they can be reinforced, accepting calculated risks to achieve decisive results, understanding enemy doctrine well enough to anticipate and counter enemy actions, remain valid in contemporary military operations. The specifics of technology and weaponry change, but the fundamental principles of effective military leadership that Patton demonstrated continue to appear in military education curricula worldwide. Conclusion: in the spring of 1944, German intelligence officers in Berlin devoted extraordinary resources to tracking one American general. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, they had accumulated extensive evidence about why that attention had been justified. George S. Patton had earned his reputation among German commanders through sustained performance across 30 months of nearly continuous combat operations. From the Moroccan coast in November 1942 to the final operations in Germany in May 1945, Patton demonstrated three characteristics that German commanders found uniquely threatening. He understood German military doctrine well enough to employ their own tactical principles against them. He operated at a tempo that consistently disrupted German defensive planning faster than German commanders could respond. And he remained fundamentally unpredictable, violating the patterns that German intelligence used to forecast enemy actions. These were not theoretical concerns or propaganda exaggerations. They were professional military assessments based on direct operational experience. When Feldmarschall von Rundstedt stated after the war that Patton was the Allied general the Germans feared most, he was providing a judgment based on having commanded against all major Allied generals and observing their operational methods firsthand. When General Bayerlin compared Patton to German panzer commanders, he was acknowledging that an enemy had mastered the type of mobile warfare that German doctrine considered most effective. The operational evidence supports these assessments. At Kasserine Pass, Patton transformed a defeated American force into an effective fighting formation within weeks. In Sicily, he conducted operations that compressed German evacuation timelines and forced costly improvisations. In France, his Third Army advanced at a pace that prevented German forces from establishing coherent defensive lines. At Falaise, the destruction of German field armies owed much to the rapid encirclement that Third Army's movements enabled. In the Ardennes, his 48-hour pivot north helped blunt Germany's last major offensive. Each of these operations, examined individually, demonstrates capable leadership and effective execution. Examined together across 30 months, they reveal consistent patterns: superior operational tempo, aggressive exploitation of opportunities, acceptance of calculated risks, and sustained offensive momentum. These patterns explain why German commanders devoted such extensive intelligence resources to tracking Patton and why they assessed him as uniquely dangerous among Allied generals. The historical significance extends beyond the specific battles. The German fear of Patton shaped their defensive dispositions, influenced their allocation of reserves, and created vulnerabilities that Allied forces exploited. Operation Fortitude succeeded in deceiving German intelligence, specifically because German commanders believed Patton would lead the main invasion effort. The resulting misallocation of German forces contributed materially to Allied success on D-Day and the subsequent consolidation of the Normandy beachhead. For contemporary students of military affairs, the story offers enduring lessons. Individual leadership matters, even in large-scale industrial warfare. Operational tempo can be decisive, creating situations where numerical or material superiority becomes less relevant. Understanding enemy doctrine enables more effective countermeasures. Unpredictability multiplies the effects of superior tempo and doctrinal understanding. These principles, demonstrated in practice by Patton's operations, remain relevant to military planning and execution. The ultimate validation of German fear of Patton comes from the historical record. German intelligence was not wrong to devote extraordinary attention to tracking him. German commanders were not exaggerating when they assessed him as their most dangerous opponent. The operational results, documented in archives and examined by historians over subsequent decades, confirm that Patton's methods consistently produced effects that disrupted German planning and forced German forces to fight under conditions of maximum disadvantage. Feldmarschall von Rundstedt's verdict stands supported by evidence. Patton was the supreme master of mobile warfare, the most dangerous Allied commander, the general German forces feared most. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of the Ardennes, George Patton earned that assessment through professional competence, sustained performance, and operational results that validated every German concern about his capabilities. If you found this deep exploration of World War II history valuable, consider subscribing to our channel for more detailed historical analysis. We examine the great battles and commanders of history not through myth or legend, but through careful analysis of primary sources, intelligence documents, and the professional assessments of those who lived through these events. Subscribe to join a community of history enthusiasts who appreciate thorough, well-researched examinations of military history's most compelling stories. New videos analyzing different aspects of the Second World War appear every week, drawing on newly available archival materials and the latest historical scholarship. Click subscribe to ensure you don't miss future content exploring the battles, leaders, and decisions that shaped the modern world.